How does the vegan justify eating at a deliberate calorie surplus? You are called lifting vegan logic, and you're interested in bodybuilding, but to build muscle, you must eat at a calorie surplus. Are you not unnecessarily hurting animals by requiring a greater number of crop deaths?
Well, hello, my fellow herbivores. Today we're going to be responding to vegetarian Stephen Woodford, aka Rationality Rules, and his discussion with vegan YouTuber Lifting Vegan Logic.
Suppose that it turns out that it's 100,000 organisms are killed for the vegan and 120,000 for the vegetarian. It just seems like these are completely arbitrary positions, and it's like, just as we can justify going, I'm going to be able to consume an extra 20% calories because of bodybuilding. It doesn't seem to be any less arbitrary, to use that word again, than the vegetarian just going, yeah, I'm going to eat an extra 20% calories because that makes me happy. They're both not needed. They're both cosmetic. As far as I'm convinced, my view is actually no more arbitrary than a vegan's. Our mere living, our mere just being here, does ensure countless deaths. If you're a vegan, it's true. If it's a vegetarian, it's true. It's not equal. There's different amounts of deaths that are caused. If you're a fat vegan, it's different to being a thin vegan. If you're a bodybuilding vegan, it's different to being, so everyone, by living a normal life, a normal healthy life, they are going to ensure a lot of deaths caused to sentient creatures.
So the two clips shown so far come from different parts of the discussion, but to me they seem to summarize one of Stephen's main contentions, which can be distilled down into something like this. Stephen imagines a vegan bodybuilder who eats excess calories and a vegetarian who eats eggs and milk, such that they end up killing the same number of animals. The bodybuilder via more indirect crop deaths, and the vegetarian via direct deaths and crop deaths. He then uses this to say something approximating that such a vegan couldn't really criticize a vegetarian, or if vegans are criticizing vegetarians, they should also be criticizing those sorts of vegans, or that it all gets a little fuzzy or murky or difficult philosophically, and that's why he isn't vegan.
This is where that threshold deontology comes in, right? It's really quite hard, and this is the point of these philosophical considerations. They test our intuitions, and they test whether or not we do hold on to certain positions. It's actually thinking about things like this that stop me from being vegan, because I don't think that there's good answers to things like this, and because I can't specify an answer. Just speaking for me, I just sat down one day and was like, oh, I really wish this was true.
Now I'm inferring and extrapolating a bit here, since by the end of the interview, it was still a little unclear to me what his exact position was, but I think this is at least a reasonable interpretation. Now to start, I don't think this adds up, and it strikes me as a narrow and myopic view of not just veganism and animal rights, but also consequentialism more generally. I say consequentialism here because it seems like that's the framework Stephen's coming from, at least for this particular objection.
If we was to take the utility of the deaths caused.
But before we dissect it, let's just zoom out for a second. Presumably, Stephen is anti-needless human suffering, anti-chattel slavery, and anti-humans dying. That's to say, with respect to humans, he broadly takes some sort of humanistic worldview. But does he ever eat a caloric surplus? Does he have more muscle or fat tissue than he absolutely needs? Does he drive or fly places for leisure? Does he always turn off his lights when he leaves a room? Is he on his computer more than he needs to be? Does he ever throw out leftovers? Because all those things will result in some amount of human suffering and deaths. Farm accidents, car accidents, plane accidents all kill humans, as do accidents related to mining ore and minerals, the felling of trees, and the process of extracting fossil fuels. Not to mention all the increased resource use and emissions, which also kill people, both via air pollution, environmental degradation, and the various other types of effects that result from climate change. Not to mention, just by the numbers, you know there will be exploitation, abusive bosses, horrible working conditions, and a panoply of other indignities, large and small, that humans will be subjected to along these supply chains. So now imagine I come along and I'm breeding humans into existence, confining them, and non-consensually harvesting their milk, hair, fingernails, piss, sweat, bathwater, and then selling them. Would he claim it's hard to say I'm really doing anything beyond the pale, or to condemn my behavior since he also eats extra calories and flies to Majorca? What if I was just buying those products from slavers and the people who were breeding those humans? What if I only bought a little bit of milk and piss and bathwater, so that the harm I caused was equal to the harm he caused by his various excesses? What if he was like, hey, you shouldn't do that, and I was all like, well, you drive cars and eat extra calories, so it's really hard to say where to draw the line since we both harm humans. Would he sign off on that? Maybe he would, but I'm pretty sure he wouldn't. Or imagine this. We're in the 1800s, and Stephen and all his friends own 10 enslaved people. And then Stephen decides to reduce down to just owning one enslaved person. Then Lifting Vegan Logic comes along and says, hey, maybe we should stop violating these people's rights and stop seeing them as exploitable resources. And Stephen says, bro, you eat excess calories and less more workers die in the process of farming. So much so that we both have the same human death count on our hands. So it's pretty hard to make the case that I should free this enslaved person. Would we accept that line of reasoning? Now I'm aware neither of these analogies is 100% perfect, as no analogy is. But I hope they illustrate the serious limitations of monomaniacally focusing on just death count when there's very relevant social, economic, symbolic, and belief variables at play. variables that'll have more durable and long-term effects on psychology, society, and culture. But what do I mean by that? Well, most people in the vegan and animal rights scene aren't just vegan to assuage their guilt or to feel morally superior, or just to cause a fleeting and myopic blip of utility because they purchased X over Y. They're vegan as part of a larger focus on abolition. That is materially abolishing animal use as a societal practice, and more abstractly abolishing the idea from our minds that animals are resources to be used for our benefit. In other words, in the slavery examples, are you concerned about body count alone, or do you think there's other important variables to consider? Like, do you really want to be that guy who's just constantly talking about body count?
Even though you guys say body count doesn't matter, your refusal to share it would indicate to me that it matters. You know it matters, and that's why you refuse to share it. Me personally, I think body count matters, so I'm not going to share my body count because I think it matters. But John, I don't know if you want to share yours.
Now maybe Steven's a hardcore consequentialist, and so he doesn't think that the belief that humans and animals are mere resources, or the attendant behavior that comes with that belief, are bad in and of themselves. But even if that's true, I still think a consequentialist case can be made. Consequentialism, as the name implies, is concerned with consequences. But to restrict those consequences only to number of deaths is bizarre, especially considering one of the most popular types of consequentialism, utilitarianism, isn't solely concerned with deaths. I don't think any consequentialist is going to sign off on the above slavery examples just because the death counts are similar. And that's because consequentialists are going to be concerned about the broad range of consequences over time and geographical space, not only one type of consequence that's highly restricted across both those variables. But what the hell does that mean? Well, let's dig in and sketch a more complete rendering of the vegan bodybuilder example. So remember, we've got a vegan bodybuilder who eats excess calories and a vegetarian who eats eggs and milk, such that they end up killing the same number of animals. So it seems like the moral ledger is balanced. You can't really say one is better than the other. But can't you? Well, first, death count doesn't account for suffering. Dairy cows are forcibly impregnated, have their babies stolen from them, and are in a near constant state of pregnancy for most of their lives. And egg-laying hens are often put in just straight up abominable conditions. The book Veganomics cites 2 sources estimating egg-laying hens to have some of the worst lives, even among other farmed animals. But let's wave our philosophy wand and say the suffering and deaths are both equalized. Are there any other differences? Yeah. Where your money goes. Killing 10 animals a year via lentil crop deaths isn't funneling money directly to the egg and dairy industry. It's not giving them resources to run some of the most successful food-related ad campaigns of all time.
Got milk.
And it's not funding lobbying groups like the National Milk Producers Federation to influence politicians. It is giving money to plant-based and vegan brands, and it's also giving money to farmers who are growing soy, pulses, grains, and seeds. In other words, it's not just reducing death and suffering. It's also channeling more power to organizations and individuals who are creating a world we want to see.
How does GPS technology make you a more efficient farmer?
It cuts our costs. You know, we're using less fertilizer per acre to produce a given amount of grain, less herbicides, less fuel, less labor cost.
So from an environmental perspective, this is useful as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Less inputs.
Less inputs, yeah.
Excellent.
While channeling less power to organizations and individuals who are creating a world we don't. Giving your money to dairy and eggs is like donating to a negative charity. If I bought $1 million of cigarettes and never smoked or distributed them, I'd still say I probably contributed to increased heart disease and lung cancer, as I basically just handed Philip Morris a milli to perpetuate their harmful product, and all the dis and misinformation that goes with it.
The babies born from women who smoke are smaller, but they're just as healthy as the babies born from women who do not smoke.
What about the higher
And
rate
some
of
women would
deaths?
prefer having smaller babies.
Also, if we look at protein-rich foods, the carbon footprints of the plant-based options are much lower. Even if we add 20% to beans, since Steven's talking about a bodybuilder eating 20% more calories, we still don't even come close to eggs or cheese. And remember, climate change doesn't just make the planet less pretty. It negatively impacts lives and causes deaths. Stuff that's very reasonable to consider in a consequentialist or utilitarian calculus. Not to mention, buying more lentils isn't going to directly promote industries with high pandemic risks. And as Steven even mentions himself, there's a messaging advantage to buff vegans.
You could say, look, if I can show you that we're going to convince more people to join, you know, the bros in the gym and thus not be eating 5 chicken breasts every day by eating, an extra 20%, 30% calories, then under utilitarianism, it seems that you could do that. That's fair.
Not to mention there's health benefits to strength training as well. Strength training doesn't just make you look better. And if we want to go peak utilitarian brain, this feeds into the idea of being a good utilitarian. The idea that a good utilitarian should look after their mental and physical health so that they can continue to do good in the world and influence others to do good as well. All else being equal, healthy individuals make more effective advocates for the animals, since presumably they have more healthy years of life to do so. Alright, but let's dial back to utilitarianism and talk about what I think might be the most important difference. Psychology. I'd propose there's a massive difference symbolically and psychologically between eating excess plant calories and eating the commodified secretions of enslaved animals. It's commonly thought that we develop attitudes and beliefs and that our behaviors follow from them. But the directionality of that relationship turns out to be much more complicated. Imagine you have an enemy you want to turn into a friend. How would you go about getting them to change their attitudes and beliefs about you? Compliment them, be nice, do them favors? Well, as David McRaney explains in his article, The Benjamin Franklin Effect, Franklin had a more unusual method: to request a favor from his enemy. And in Franklin's autobiography, he recounts a story where he does just that. Franklin says, having heard that he, the enemy, had in his library a certain very scarce and curious book, I wrote a note to him expressing my desire of perusing that book and requesting he would do me the favor of lending it to me for a few days. He sent it immediately, and I returned it in about a week with another note expressing strongly my sense of the favor. When we next met in the house, he spoke to me, which he had never done before, and with great civility, and he ever after manifested a readiness to serve me on all occasions so that we became great friends and our friendship continued to his death. That's right, he didn't do a favor for him, he asked for one. But why did this work? Well, as McRaney outlines, self-perception theory and cognitive dissonance may hold the key. Self-perception theory says your attitudes are shaped by observing your own behavior. Being unable to pinpoint the cause and trying to make sense of it, you look back on a situation as if in an audience trying to understand your own motivations. You act as observer of your actions, a witness to your thoughts, and you form beliefs about yourself based on those observations. Self-perception theory shows you unconsciously observe your own actions and explain them in a pleasing way without ever realizing it. Benjamin Franklin's enemy observed himself performing a generous and positive act by offering the treasured tome to his rival. And then he unconsciously explained his own behavior to himself. He must not have hated Franklin after all, he thought. Why else would he do something like that? And many psychologists would explain the Benjamin Franklin effect through the lens of cognitive dissonance. Sometimes you can't find a logical, moral, or socially acceptable explanation for your actions. Sometimes your behavior runs counter to the expectations of your culture, your social group, your family, or even the person you believe yourself to be. In those moments you ask, why did I do that? And if the answer damages your self-esteem, a justification is required. You feel like a bag of sand is ruptured in your head and you want relief. But why is this important? Because eating animals and their secretions is a behavior that'll subsequently affect your attitudes and beliefs about those individuals. If we use them as vending machines, we'll view them as vending machines. And we're not just extrapolating from these general psychological principles, because we have multiple studies that are directly relevant. This study, for instance, had one group of participants eat beef jerky and another group eat cashews. Then each of them filled out questionnaires related to the moral standing and psychological capacities of animals. So what did the authors find? That the current study provides direct evidence that eating meat leads people to withdraw moral concern from both animals in general and the animal they ate. Further, it provides evidence that eating meat indirectly leads people to deny the animal they ate the mental states closely linked to the capacity to suffer. In other words, the behavior of eating the jerky compared to the behavior of eating the cashews cause people's attitudes and beliefs regarding animals to change. And in this study, just being told they were going to be eating meat, as in they would be doing so in the near future, caused participants to deny animal minds to a greater degree than those participants who did not expect to be eating animal body parts. And this is the thing. How many animals die, how they suffer, these are issues vegans should and do care about. How animals live in the real world is important, but perhaps more important is how they live in our minds, because their residence there determines how they'll be treated in perpetuity. It's one thing to just not eat animals or their eggs or milk. It's another thing altogether to truly dismantle those structures of objectification we've erected in our own minds. As psychologist Elliot Aronson said, human beings aren't rational animals. We're rationalizing animals who want to appear reasonable to ourselves. And as long as we still view animals as mere commodities, they'll never truly be liberated from these horrors, because we'll always find ways to rationalize our treatment of them. Are any of us gullible enough to believe that in a world where people still fundamentally see animals as something rather than someone, that's the world where we most aggressively and expeditiously tackle crop deaths or animal agriculture in general? A world where there still are vending machines? That's the psychological and cultural headspace we need to solve that problem? Think about other times when we insisted on treating someone as something. Did that ever end up being good for those someones? Was that the fastest path to their emancipation? Imagine two scenarios. In scenario 1, we wave our philosophy wand and 75% of the population are now vegans who lift weights and eat excess calories. In scenario 2, 75% of the population become vegetarians who eat a normal amount of calories. Which one of these is going to see animal agriculture dismantled more quickly? Which is going to see crop deaths tackled more quickly? I'll give you a hint. It's this one. Now, a deontologist is going to say something like it's fundamentally wrong to view and treat animals as property and commodify their body and secretions. Great. But that doesn't mean it isn't also relevant to consequentialism or utilitarianism, which I've kind of been assuming the whole time is more in line with Stephen's normative ethics. If well-being or suffering or utility matter, they matter everywhere and they matter all the time. They mattered 100 years in the past and they matter 100 years in the future. They matter in Madagascar and they even matter in Florida, which is why consideration of the fundamental way that people in society view animals has to be included in that utilitarian calculus. If utilitarians didn't have to consider downstream effects, they could and should with a straight face say that everyone should start doing heroin. And this is what the slavery examples from earlier are trying to illustrate. They're not used for shock value or to say that if given the opportunity, Stephen would obviously buy slaves. They're used to show how in the real world, this sort of myopic and parochial moral accounting doesn't always add up. Now my fellow vegans might be wondering why I didn't go into a discussion about rights here. And one reason is because they covered this quite a bit in the original video. But I have a lot more I want to say about this discussion. However, I wanted to keep this video a reasonable length. So if that interests you, let me know in the comments and I may make a part 2. And if you want to help me make this my full-time career, check out the Patreon in the description. And shout out to Ryan O'Neill, Tom Eisenbeiss, NetBase News, Monstar, David Yastrzemski, and Maxwell Edison.